Hello and welcome to another episode of Riley's Videos. Today we're going to be looking at Hitler's rise to power, specifically focusing on why the Nazi Party became more popular after 1929. There are quite a few events and individuals that helped the German Workers' Party grow from a handful of ex-soldiers to a national political powerhouse. I'm going to be explaining the basics of each of these 12 key points audibly. If you want higher marks and need more specific information, I would practice stop and jot. Pausing the video every now and again to write down key facts and then resuming once your notes for that section are complete. Let's begin in 1919. The German Workers' Party started off really small. The party was founded by Anton Drexler and attracted right-wing nationalists. Hitler was member number 55, and that gives you an idea of just how small this movement was. There are some people that believe that Hitler's number was actually 555, as in 555, and this was due to the impression that there were more people in the party than there actually were. Once Hitler joined the DAP, he rose through the ranks very quickly. He helped Drexler transform the party, and together they drew up the 25-point programme. This included policies such as reversing the Treaty of Versailles and making Germany great again. So let's jump in straight away with a quick exam question. The first question you'll see on Germany paper 3 is an inference question. This is worth 4 marks, and it requires you to interact with the source and draw some inferences, some assumptions based on that source and a particular focus in the question. This is a bad example. The inference itself is correct. The Nazi Party did not like Jewish people. We can assume that. However, the quote that's been used, get rid of the Treaty of Versailles, doesn't match. And therefore, you would only get 1 mark, and that is for the correct inference. The next example is much better. Same inference, but this time we've used a different quote instead. The Nazi Party did not like Jewish people. And then if we look at element number 4, or feature number 4, no Jew can be a German citizen. That inference and quote do link, therefore the 2 marks is fair. The 25-point programme did attract more members and more voters, but it wasn't until Hitler actually took charge that the party really began to grow. Hitler renamed the German Workers' Party into the Nationalist Socialist German Workers' Party so that it could appeal to more left-wing and right-wing voters. He invented the swastika logo, made up of colours representative of the German flag, and also invented the SA, the stormtroopers. The SA, or the brown shirts, were the private army of the Nazi Party. They used violence and intimidation to disrupt other political parties, mainly in Munich, which is where they were based, and to protect NSDAP meetings. Many historians argue that the Munich Putsch was Hitler's first step in seizing power, even though it was an unsuccessful one. In 1923, Hitler tried to overthrow the Munich government. Hitler had the support of war hero General Ludendorff and a local politician, Gustav von Kahr. When Hitler found out that Kahr was actually planning on staging a revolution without him, Hitler was of course not very happy. He and the SA stormed the Munich beer hall and held Kahr and his colleagues hostage. At this meeting at the beer hall, Hitler forced Kahr and his colleagues, Lassalle and Seisser, to support this rebellion, which Kahr agreed to at first. However, given the opportunity, Kahr notified the local government and the army. The SA were ambushed, 16 Nazis died, and Hitler was later arrested. As you can imagine, holding people hostage, marching around the streets of a very busy German city in uniforms and guns and shouting revolution was going to get Hitler into a lot of trouble. He was actually put on trial for treason, one of the most serious crimes you can commit. However, his defence speech was so convincing that the judge felt sympathy for him. Instead of the death penalty or years and years in prison, Hitler actually only served 9 months. The period after the Munich Putsch is referred to as the lean years, or like the slim years. This is in terms of how much support the Nazi Party had got. Let's just bear in mind what's been happening over the last couple of months. Their party has been humiliated during a failed revolution, their leader imprisoned, and their party actually banned for a little period of time. So as you can imagine, the Nazi Party is not doing very well at all. Once Hitler left prison, he decided to seize power legally, rather than using violence. To do this, he needed to change the image of the Nationalist Socialist German Workers' Party. The Nazis focused more on propaganda, trying to spread their influence over other areas of Germany, not just the south, where they were based. And again, in an effort to try and change their image and appear more respectable, they even hired an accountant to manage all of their money. There are other videos which I've done which focus mainly on knowledge and nothing else. To do that for Germany wouldn't be a wise move. 5 out of the 6 questions on the Germany paper are about sources and interpretations. So whilst having keywords and dates and people and having all of that knowledge nailed down, it's also important that you practice some of these source and interpretation questions. Let's take, for example, this propaganda poster from 1929. You might find this attached to question 3A, which would be something along the lines of how useful is source B and C for an inquiry into? And let's just take, for example, this one, the changing popularity of the Nazi Party. What you can see in the pink box is a really good example of somebody ticking off all of the necessary criteria for a good source utility response. I'm not going to read the full response out to you, but just in terms of what you can see, the first couple of sentences are all about engaging with the source material. There's a very clear reference to the source and then a link back to the question. The provenance, that's the nature, the origin, the purpose of the source, that's discussed a little bit later on as well. And there's some very good use of supporting old knowledge to determine that the source is actually useful. And most sources will be useful. The Bamberg Conference of 1926 is a turning point for the Nazi Party. The nationalists and the socialists within the party had very different ideas on who they should be appealing to. Hitler realised that a divided party would not only fail in elections, but they would also fail to run the government in a way that would create this 1,000-year Reich that Hitler had always dreamed of. At this conference, Hitler gave a 4-hour speech outlining his vision for Germany, a vision which did not include Jews, the Weimar, or socialists. And by socialists we mean pretty much anybody that's left-wing, so that's socialists, Marxists and communists. Any socialists in the party who did not conform were eventually rooted out by Hitler or later assassinated in 1934 during Night of the Long Knives. So this is a turning point in the audience that the Nazis appealed to. A bigger turning point for the Nazis was the Wall Street crash. The Weimar government had gambled on the American stock market, relied on US loans to stay afloat, and ultimately fell victim to the Great Depression. When America sneezed, the whole world caught a cold, especially Germany. Unemployment skyrocketed to 6 million just 2.5 years after the Wall Street crash. Many were left poor, homeless, and felt like they had very little support from the government. Case in point, Chancellor Brüning raised taxes, lowered benefits and decided that less people could have access to benefits, and passed many of these unpopular laws, not through the government, but by using Article 48 emergency powers. We're going to spend a little bit more time on this particular exam question than we have the other two. Questions 3B, 3C and 3D on your exam are worth 28 marks in total. That's over 50% of the available marks on paper 3 are judged on your analysis of 2 historical arguments, 2 historians' opinions. Therefore, it's really important that you read the question properly and you read the interpretations properly. With that in mind, I would heavily recommend that you either pause the video or you take a screenshot for your notes later on so that you can have a proper read through the interpretation and have a proper read through the student response on the left-hand side. Again, just to make the student response a little bit easier, it's been colour-coded in terms of the different elements that you need to include for a good interpretation 16 marker. This is obviously only one half of that particular question. You'll be expected to do both interpretations and ideally a short conclusion on which interpretation you agree with the most. So like I said before, take a screenshot or have a pause of the video and have a proper read. Back to the narrative, and we're almost there now. It's 1932. There are 6 million people unemployed, and people's faith in the Weimar is well and truly shaken. The Nazis are in campaign overdrive. Hitler's giving speeches to thousands of people every other day. Goebbels' work and bread posters are tactically positioned all over Germany, outside soup kitchens, outside employment centres, and Hitler has just been narrowly defeated in the presidential elections by Hindenburg. In the May 1932 Reichstag elections, remember there are two elections that take place. There's one for who's in charge of the government and there's one for who the actual president is. So these are the Reichstag elections, and the Nazis have received 37% of the vote, which means that Hitler should have been named Chancellor. However, Hindenburg had witnessed this cult of personality, this incredible popularity of Hitler, and therefore decided to not appoint Hitler and instead appoint a man called von Papen. Von Papen was the leader of a very small right-wing party. Therefore, when he was attempting to pass laws through the Reichstag, which would be voted on by other parties, they were, of course, blocked by the Nazi members of parliament that make up the 37%. So he couldn't get any of his laws passed. However, he continued, like Brüning had done before, to rely on Hindenburg to use his emergency powers to effectively bypass democracy. Members of the Reichstag eventually had a vote of no confidence in von Papen, and he was replaced by a similar right-wing leader known as von Schleicher. He again experienced similar problems, couldn't get any of his laws passed, and he was forced to resign. Hindenburg was left with no choice now but to appoint Hitler as Chancellor, hoping that appointing von Papen as Vice-Chancellor, the two would be able to control Hitler and the Nazis. Hitler was now the second most powerful man in Germany, and it would take him just a couple of months in 1933 before he would be able to remove all the other political parties, temporarily suspend democracy, and by temporarily we mean about 15 years, and completely limit the freedom of speech of every single person in Germany. He actually becomes complete dictator not even 18 months later. So I know that's a lot of information to have in such a short space of time. If you've watched the video from start to finish and there's been no stop and jot, hopefully you've just taken a couple of bullet points of key facts, and your sheet or your notes should look a little bit like this. Obviously, if you have stopped and jotted, then you'll have a much more detailed set of revision notes, which again is quite useful if you're going for a higher grade. In terms of our key focus, which was explaining why the popularity of the Nazi Party increased, I would go for these three kind of key, let's call them themes, key features. First and foremost has got to be the Great Depression of 1929. Then Hitler's decision to try and gain power through legal means rather than violence. And then the promises which Hitler and the Nazi Party made after the Wall Street crash. I'd use those three. And a good way to consolidate your notes and consolidate your understanding is, first of all, go away and have a short break. You've deserved it if you've listened to this all the way through. Once you're ready, find a quiet space and try and apply that knowledge that you've just gained to an exam question. Here's a 12 marker with some sentence starters and basic notes for additional support. If you're revising for paper 3, there are a few other videos on my channel that you might find useful. Other than that, thank you very much for listening and all the best.